Now the cerebellum, it actually shows much variation among both the fishes and reptiles, and it has got a very extensive surface in the case of the birds and the mammals. So the cerebellum, it's actually very less developed, as we have discussed in the previous lecture, that it is less developed in the case of the birds, but it is having very extensive kind of a surface in the case of the birds and even in the mammals. So the function of the cerebellum, if I take the functional evolution of the brain, so we have to talk about the function of the cerebellum. It is actually the integrating function. So it is a true integrating organ which is like receiving the impulses from the cerebrum and is taking the impulses to the medulla and the spinal cord. So it is a kind of the integrating organ, which is very important part in the integration of the impulses in between the different parts of the brain. Now, if I talk about the developmental aspects of the cerebellum, now when it was developing, if I take out the origin of the cerebellum, it is originating from the very same points as the cerebrum is developing. So both are developing at the same time. They are developing from the same, you can say, the tube, the neural tube, and the cerebellum. It is very closely associated with the medulla. So if I take the association, the cerebellum is very closely associated with the medulla. So is it having some properties of the medulla as per the functions? As medulla was very closely associated with the locomotory centers, it is very closely associated with the postural control, that was very closely associated with the you can say equilibrium in the animal. So what is the case of the cerebellum? As it is very closely associated with the medulla, so is there any functional association also? So scientists, they have found that the cerebellum, as the medulla, it is very closely associated with the posture regulation of the animal. So uh, here I should write postural control. So cerebellum has also got the postural controls, as it is an integrating organ. So medulla and the cerebellum, they both are involved in the postural controls of the animal. So now I'll be taking this as a subheading. So I'm taking the very first heading as the cerebellum and the postural maintenance. So students, here we have like many experiments done which have shown that the cerebellum has got some relation with the postural maintenance of the animals. So the first experiment was done on the like dogfish. I am taking this as the first example. So what the scientists, they have done, they have removed the cerebellum from the dogfish. So what they have seen, that if they have removed the cerebellum as a whole, the whole of the cerebellum has been removed, what was the result? It fails to interfere with the swimming. So there is no effect on swimming. So it was swimming like beautifully. So what was the second case? Now if we remove one half of the cerebellum, if we are not removing the cerebellum as a whole, we remove one half of the dogfish, then what was the result? Actually it was playing spirally. So what has been seen, that there are circus movements in the case of the fish when one half of the cerebellum is removed, and These circus movements, these spiral movements, they are on the direction, they are in the direction of the half removed cerebellum. If you have removed the left half of the cerebellum, the spiral movements will be in the left side. So if you have removed the right cerebellum, these spiral movements, they are on towards the right side. So that was the experiment which has like given some idea that the cerebellum in the case of the dogfish, it has got some control over the postural maintenance. Now scientists, they have experimented further in this particular case, and they have found that if the left cerebrum, not cerebrum, the cerebellum, if the left cerebellum has been removed, what happens? The left fins, they move slowly, they move slow. So what happens that when the left fins they move slow and the right fins they are fast, so they will like push the water more onto the right side, and the fish will swirl, or it can move spirally to the left side. So that was the mechanism that was found, that why the fish swims left side when the left cerebellum has been removed. So the fins on that particular side will move slowly. So now students, we have the second experimental animal, that are the teleos, or the bony fishes. Those were the cartilaginous fishes. Dogfish was a cartilaginous fish. Teleos, they are the bony fishes. So here what has been seen, that we have a poorly developed cerebellum. First of all, so cerebellum was poorly developed, but when it was removed, so what was the result? That the movement was hindered. So there was less of the movement, and if we take out the left, suppose cerebellum, what was the result? The same kind of spiral movements, they were seen towards the left side of the fish. So there was a difference in these two experiments of teleos and the dogfish. If we remove the left cerebellum of the dogfish, what has happened, that it was showing the spiral movements towards the left side. Same here, we are seeing the spiral movements onto the left side, but there is a difference, that the here in this particular case of the teleos, the fish actually it lies down onto the operated side. So this is the difference. The teleos, they have seen to lie down onto the dissected side. So here it will be the left side. So it will lie down onto the left side, onto the substratum. The fish will not be able to move or to swim. The fins of the left side, they are totally non-working. They are in the non-working condition. But in the case of the scalodon or the dogfish, we have seen there was an activity in the left side, or the left side fins, but the activity was low. But here in the teleos, there is no activity. So that's why the fish, it lies down onto the left side, or on the side where we have like decerebrated the fish. Now students, we have the example of the frog. Now in the case of frog, jumping is a very important aspect of like preying, of the movement. So this is a very important you can say physiological you can say movement in the case of the frog. So here what the scientists they have seen, that if we remove one lateral half of the cerebellum of the frog, so again we take out, suppose, the left side of the cerebellum, what will be the effect? The head, it will tilt. The head will tilt onto the left side. So this is a very important, you can say, equilibrium problem in the case of the frog. And second result, which is by the taking out of the left cerebellum, it is that the left limbs, both the forelimb and the hind limb of the left side, they will be under flexion. They will be stretched out. They will not be like, they are not capable of jumping. So jumping from the left side, it is hindered. So that simply means that the jumping action in the frog, that is under the control of the cerebellum. Okay, so after that, one more experiment was done on the frogs. So the scientists, they have taken out the cerebellum as a whole from the frogs. So when we take out the whole of the cerebellum out, what was the result? So the result was muscular weakness. So there is lethargy all over, their passiveness. The legs and the forelimbs, they are lethargic. It is not able to like jump. The frog is no longer able to jump. And one more important thing is that frog was unable to catch flies. That was very important. So as we know that the frog, it is catching the flies with the help of the tongue. And the scientists, what they do is that they take out that particular frog, this particular frog with the uh, dissected cerebellum. So it was taken out, and the frog was given some flies to eat. So the frog can see the flies like lying just, you can say, uh, near the frog, but the frog was not in a condition to like point out that where is the fly positioned. So the frog is unable to catch the fly with the tongue, because a normal frog is like highly efficient in catching the flies. It can precisely measure, or you can say precisely find out the exact position of the fly. But after taking out the cerebellum, the whole cerebellum, the frog was unable to catch the flies. So this particular experiment gives us some view that the cerebellum has got some relation with the postural maintenance as well as the equilibrium process, or you can say the preying process in the case of the frogs. Now students, after postural maintenance, now I'm taking the second sub part under the cerebellum, which is the equilibrium. Now students, here I start with the case of the reptiles. Now as we know that the reptiles, they have got these sprawled postures. Sprawled postures refer to as the postures just like this. So the limbs, they are not below the body. So body is in the center, and the limbs, they are extended towards both the sides, on through the left and the right side. So these are called as the sprawled postures. So the animals with especially the sprawled postures, they have got like, they should be having a good equilibrium process for maintaining the postures or for the maintenance of the gaits. Now the reptiles, they can have a trigonal relationship of the gait, they can have a diagonal relationship in the gait, and these gaits or the postures, they are under the controls of the cerebellum in the case of the reptiles. So if I talk about the movement in these sprawled posture reptiles, so the cerebellum, it is very important part which is controlling the equilibrium in these reptiles, and it is giving smoothness in the movements. So that is a very important part. Now if you have to take out a leg from a particular place to the next point, it should be smooth. So this smoothness to the movements, it is given by the cerebellum. If I take out the cerebellum from a lizard, suppose if I take the example of a lizard and I take out the cerebellum, so what happens? What is the result? It walks just like as a drunken man. So that means uh, if you take some alcohol, you are out of the senses, and now you are like walking just like a drunken man. And the lizard without the cerebellum is just like that. There is no smoothness in the movement. It can go left sides and then it can go towards the right side, and it can like bend upon some side also. So the equilibrium or the cerebellum, it is giving the smoothness to the movements. Now we take the case of the birds. Now students, as the birds they have to fly, they have a well developed flight mechanism. In the physiology of the muscles, we have taken up the flight mechanisms in the case of birds. We have seen the aerodynamics in the case of the flight mechanism of the birds. And if we observe the actual flight steps in a particular bird, we can see the importance of the equilibrium in the case of the birds. So there is a much need of the equilibrium when they are taking the flight, when they have taken the flight, when they are gliding, and when they are coming down up to the ground. There is much importance of the equilibrium in the case of the birds. So the cerebellum, it is of, you can say, not of much high volume, but it is much, you can say, developed as per the mechanism of equilibrium is concerned in the case of the birds. And the birds, they have got high senses of the balance. So this sense of the balance in the birds, it comes because of the cerebellum. Now if for some of the days after the removal of the cerebellum, a bird can hardly fly, walk or stand. So if you take out the cerebellum from a bird, so what can be the result? It is unable to fly, there will be no flying, there will be no walking, and it cannot even stand erect. So this is the function of the cerebellum in the case of the birds. So it falls readily to one side, you can say. So bird cannot stand still, it cannot stand erect. So one more thing which scientists they have seen after the removal of the cerebellum, see, birds cannot fly, walk or stand, but they can eat and they can drink. That means eating center is not under the control of the cerebellum. Drinking center or the thirst center is not under the control of the cerebellum. So cerebellum is more in relation to the movement and the equilibrium or the postural control in the case of the birds. Now I take up the example of a mammal. So when the cerebellum is removed from a mammal, no single reaction is lost. So everything happens in a mammal. It can like walk, it can eat, it can drink, but the ability to balance in a precise way is impaired. Again, it is the balance. That means the cerebellum has got a relation with the balance or the equilibrium in the case of the birds and the mammals in particular. Now there is one more example of the bats. Now bats are said to like lose their ability to fly after losing the cerebellum. So if we take out the cerebellum of the bats, they cannot fly. So cerebellum is again controlling the flying or the postural controls or the equilibrium of the bats also. So they cannot like stand still and they cannot fly. Now if I talk something about cats and dogs, they are, you can say, the higher mammals. So there is the same result in the case of the cats and dogs. They cannot like move in a balanced manner, but this balancing you can say inability is more in cats and dogs than in the apes. So if you take out the cerebellum from the cats and the dogs, what will happen? The effect will be more in cats and dogs than the apes. So apes or man, it has got less of the effect on the balance if you take out the cerebellum. Now as we are talking about the cats, the cerebrum and the cerebellum, they actually both are producing electrical rhythms, and it has been seen that in the cats especially, the cerebellum, it is showing an electrical rhythm of higher frequency than the cerebrum. So cerebellum is producing higher frequency rhythms as compared to the cerebrum. There is some localization of the electrical responses to sensory stimulation of the feet and the vibrissae of the cats. It has also been described in the particularly the case of the cats. So there is sensory stimulation of the vibrissae. These are the like fine hair-like structures on the mouth of the cat. So these are also has got some relation with the vibrissae. So in general, if I talk about all the classes of the animals, the cerebellum is more in relation to the equilibrium and the postural control in the animals. And if we take out the part of the cerebellum or we take out the whole of the cerebellum out of any of the animal, it can result into the loss of the postural control and the equilibrium, which further results into the lack of, you can say, the walking movement, the swimming movement, the running movement, and the standing postures. So that was about the cerebellum.